Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss the latest statement raising eyebrows and drawing no small measure of ridicule from Boris Johnson, who said that of course Ukraine should rejoin the EU. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So, Boris Johnson has found Ukraine's plight enormously helpful for his image. As Prime Minister, he would ask President Zelensky to lend him some credibility and popularity every time he was in real trouble. It got to the point where whenever you would see especially damaging headlines in the news about Johnson, people would joke that he'd be holding a conversation with Zelensky later that day. Only it wasn't a joke, because it almost always happened. If the headlines were really bad, he'd go for a personal visit, photo opportunity, to try and steer the news away from his latest source of shame. Not that he was ever ashamed. Now that he's no longer Prime Minister, he's travelling the world saying what people should do, including advising world leaders to do what he never did as Prime Minister, including supplying Ukraine with tanks and jets. Not that Johnson did anything at all for Ukraine. The UK's response was an exact shadow of that the US were doing, on a smaller scale, of course. And it was organised on our part by Defence Secretary Ben Wallace. No impact from Johnson at all. He could have blocked it, but that was it. But this statement from Johnson about the EU, we all know that Ukraine are desperate to join the EU. Indeed, that is the main drive behind Russia's invasion. Yes, Putin needs more resources to feed his cabal, but he turned nasty back when Ukraine showed signs of wanting to tilt more toward Europe than Russia. It's also been a source of good-humoured needling, I think, of Tory Brexiteers who have to, in the same breath, both denounce the EU as this evil empire, but also show unwavering and unconditional solidarity with one of its biggest fans. And now Johnson has said in a recorded interview that when Ukraine wins, they should, of course, join the EU. Now, this could be taken a couple of ways, I suppose. After all, Churchill was a big advocate of the concept of European powers banding together in this community with a common market at its core, but initially he didn't feel that the UK should be part of it. Some may suppose that Johnson is merely echoing this sentiment, that the EU is absolutely marvellous for those in the continent. Of course it is, absolutely brilliant, but not quite the right fit for the UK. But there are two massive holes in this argument. The first is that Churchill's position was based on the idea of the UK leading the Commonwealth as one bulwark of Western civilization. The other two would be the United States and this European community. But any vision of a world order that relied on imperialism was shot to pieces after Suez. So at the end of his life, Churchill agreed that the UK joining the EEC was probably the right decision. Second, there was a time when a good number of prominent Brexiteers would say that they wanted the EU to be strong partners, but that we should just not be part of them. Well, they're sort of gone now, or they're a lot quieter. If you spend as much time as I do listening to interviews or reading articles by prominent Brexiteers these days, all that's left are the Brexiteers who want nothing less than the destruction of the EU. No longer is the reason for leaving because it's not a good fit for us, but because it's this evil little empire. It always gives you a double take in itself. The same people who explicitly, not just implicitly, explicitly defend the British Empire, so the British Empire was a force for good, they will use those words, say that the EU is bad because, drum roll, it's an empire, which is both untrue and mind-blowing in the scale of hypocrisy to even make that argument. Johnson, who seems to have become the unofficial president of the Friends of Ukraine Society, I think, is saying that his favourite country should join the EU. Therefore, he's also saying the EU is a force for good. Otherwise, why recommend that his best buddy join it? This sets him hugely at odds with the Brexiteers upon whose support he relied, and presumably wants to again if he thinks he can challenge Sunak later this year. First of all, it's worth remembering why Boris Johnson is giving the impression of being an unpaid advocate for Ukraine's interests in the UK and around the world. After all, he doesn't really do anything without a big brown paper bag, does he? You know, and this is also the man who defended Russia during their initial invasion of Ukraine in 2014. He defended Russia. Who did he blame for it? The EU. The EU. Has the man who parted with Russian agents, taken millions in donations from Putin's circle, really had a sudden change of heart? No, he just seized the opportunity to rewrite history in his favour. Johnson's time in office is essentially defined by his tawdry scandals, which he's never going to escape from, his poor handling of the pandemic, which will only become more clear as various inquiries shine a spotlight onto the failures and corruption over the coming months and years, because they'll carry on until we've got all the answers, and selling his soul for political power by pushing the most destructive Brexit he thought he could get away with. This will also become more apparent in time, as the media and public have to face up to the damage being done by leaving the EU. In 15 years' time, when Johnson will be retired from public life, but his ego will still want people interviewing him so he can say how great he was, he's not going to enjoy the public attitude to his time in office at that point. But support for Ukraine is popular and will remain so no matter what happens. Johnson has grabbed this opportunity to be associated with something timelessly popular with both hands. He doesn't even have to do anything other than swan around pretending that he's Ukraine's friend. But make no mistake, he no more cares about the plight or future of Ukraine than he did in 2014 when he defended Russia's initial incursion. Everything he's doing and saying is designed to either improve people's opinion of him or tarnish the opinion of people he sees as opponents. In terms of domestic policies, the Tory press is full of Johnson saying that tax cuts will help the Tories win the next election. It's funny how especially dishonest political leaders change their policies so abruptly after leaving office, isn't it? This is the Prime Minister who introduced the highest tax burden for 70 years. And he doesn't get to hide behind the Chancellor at the time, Rishi Sunak. Johnson was the Prime Minister. He was the boss. Not only did he have the power to force the Chancellor to adopt certain red lines, but he was in the habit of doing so anyway. He had, whilst in office, stopped Sunak adopting certain policies, so he could have done with this one as well. He didn't. The Prime Minister who gave us the highest tax burden since the days when we were rebuilding a country shattered by World War now says that tax cuts are the way forward. He would not be saying this were he Prime Minister now. He's saying it to undermine the person who is. And if his dreams came true and Sunak fell in May and he was made Prime Minister by the end of May, do you know what? All of a sudden, oh yeah, those tax cuts, it was the right time when I said so, but now it's not, you know. Which brings me back to why this statement is odd for someone who wants to depose Sunak and come back to Downing Street. Brexit is facing something of an existential crisis. Some Brexiteers are trying to claim that we do have concrete benefits. I was reading a supposed list of them yesterday, full of the usual lies, statistical ineptitude and measures we could have adopted as EU members anyway. But it'll work on some. In theory, the problem is that the sort of people who might believe them are not really the sort of people who are likely to read a lengthy blog post, even if it were to be given away free with a copy of the Daily Mail, which it's not. The ones who said we should leave because the EU are collapsing, they're less vocal now. The Daily Express tries it out now and then, but it's going nowhere. Most of the public don't actually believe that Brexit's doing us any good. Even the ones who still support it, at best, think that maybe it will in a decade or two. Most of the public don't believe that the EU is collapsing anytime soon either, so that line of defence for Brexit isn't working. The best chance for Brexiteers is to try and persuade key voters that it is morally wrong to be part of the EU. Oh yes, it might do us some good, it may have done us some good and would do us some good if we rejoin, but it's a moral crusade, this is morally wrong. Which surely makes it difficult to back a leader who is saying that his best buddy Ukraine should of course join the EU as soon as it is able. If Johnson did spot an opportunity to topple Sunak, would the hardline Brexiteers in the party really welcome back the man who they know only backed Brexit for political power, just when he seems to be going soft on the rhetoric against it? But there we are, those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.